Nominations for the chair, please.
Can I nominate Andy Burnham, please? Mayor Andy Burnham.
Okay, we've got Mayor Driscoll nominating.
Thank you very much indeed, colleagues. It's a real honour actually to be asked to chair this committee at this time and to have your support. And I would want to say at the beginning that this can be something of a new start, hopefully, for the railways across the north of England. Obviously, we've been through a lot in recent times, but we do now have a position where we have the ability together to shape the railway more across both sides of the Pennines. And I think, as chair, I will seek to make the most of that opportunity, working with you all and working with all parts of the north, cross-party as well. We won't compromise in this committee on our call for a railway for our residents across all parts of the north of at least equal standard as the railway in other parts of the country, and we would never do that, and I think that goes without saying for everybody on this committee. But we will pursue that, working constructively with the railway industry and with the government, and that's the way I would intend to proceed as chair. So I'm really grateful for the support of colleagues, and I'm determined to make this a period where we do see continued improvement. Obviously, making the case for those improvements in the here and now matters to our residents, and we will need to kind of work through with both main operators now under operator of last resort, how we can help make those improvements come as quickly as possible, and we'll no doubt talk about that today as we get into the agenda. But it is also about making the investment case for the infrastructure to support the services and the timetable that we want. And then there's a third element to our work, which is, as city regions like the one I lead, but obviously other mayors around the table, Mayors Rotherham, Driscoll, Coffard, who are here today. I'm sure Mayor Brabin will be joining us. We will obviously want to integrate the railway more and more into our own city regions, and we'll want to use this committee to see how we take forward that thinking. So those are just a few words of welcome from me, and thanks to colleagues around the table, and hopefully it can feel like a new start today in terms of the discussions we're about to have. But what I mustn't do is fail in my first task of dealing with the rest of item 2, which is to appoint a majority vice chair, or a vice chair of the majority party, and one for the minority party. So taking those two issues in turn, are there nominations for the majority vice chair?
Yes, can I nominate Councillor Susan Hinchcliffe, please?
Seconded by?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Martin. So, colleagues, that's a nomination for Councillor Susan Hinchcliffe. Morning, Susan. Leader of Bradford Council, seconded as well by Martin. Is that agreed, colleagues?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you. Next item, do we have nominations for a vice chair from the minority party on Transport for the North?
If there are no nominations, Chair, then we can defer that item to the next meeting.
Okay, is that the wish of the committee to defer? Okay, let's defer it and take that at our. Is there a July meeting? I should know, shouldn't I? September. So we will take that at our September meeting. Okay, thank you, colleagues. So let's press on with the agenda. Item 3, declarations of interest. So colleagues are obviously required to declare any personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interest that they may have, and you know the procedure for how to do that. So if colleagues would declare any items, any declarations of interest, that would be appreciated. Item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. This is to seek your approval for those minutes.
Just a couple of
Rotherham.
a couple of items for. I mean, first of all, one is just for consistency. It's got Liverpool City Region and all the other areas. It's got the combined authority afterwards. So just for consistency, if somebody's reading them from outside, then what is Liverpool City Region? So it's just a plan. There's a couple of things on page 8. It says that I commented that people no longer visit Liverpool at weekends. So I don't think I don't think I can allow that to stand in the minutes as is. So I'd like a correction there. It's more difficult for people to visit Liverpool at the weekends. And then just to note on page 9, 511, it's got regarding Liverpool, the state of the service is more reliable, but intermittent than previously, and plans have been made for the Eurovision Song Contest, because we're 1 minute into it and I've not mentioned the Eurovision Song Contest, but they've been working with officers to make sure that services are better for the town. Just to let people know that obviously the strikes curtailed any chance of us having national rail connections for Eurovision, but if the strikes hadn't have gone on, just to let people know about the sort of problems that we had with TPE and Northern trying to get services running to what was something that was hosted in the city of Liverpool, but wasn't the city of Liverpool thing. It was a national and international event. And yet we couldn't get guarantees from the train operating companies, even before the strike action was called, that we could run services to take people from that event back to other parts of the country. And for me, it displayed and outlined the problems that we've got in a fragmented rail system, that in London, just a few weeks before for the coronation, services were running right the way through the night. There was no interruption at all. And we couldn't get some limited services to take the many thousands of people away from an event of that scale. And of course, with hotels absolutely rammed, we had to find alternatives, and I just need also to explain that this is not a criticism of DFT, because I think DFT did try to pull out all the stops. It was just the system itself. It's just perhaps a microcosm of what's happening across the whole of the network.
No, thanks very much, Steve. Councillor Hitchcock, Susan?
Yeah, just on the item 7 on the minutes about East Coast Main Line, asking about the lead study in terms of reference and government press to publish them. I just don't know where we are with that, and just officers just give me an update on that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Is there a quick update on that?
Chair, Chair, maybe I'll just do. We were understood that they were expected soon. By the end of May, I think we were told there's a possibility. We obviously haven't seen them yet. I think we, at every opportunity on your behalf, have been stressing to the department the importance of getting those terms of reference out. And I think, in fairness, the ministerial team are keen to get them out as well. So we'll keep pressing, but no firm date yet, Councillor Hinchcliffe.
If there's a committee we can push that, Chair, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Point taken. Thank you, Susan. On Steve's wider point, I think this touches on what I was saying about building the case for the railway we need in the future, because we want major events in the north of England, and congratulations, Steve, on Eurovision, which was a huge success for the Liverpool City region. You did us all proud, given the way that was organised. But I do think, and we know this in Manchester as well, at the big kind of weekends that we have, there is always an issue with regard to that later night transport. I just think we need to pick it up in that discussion about what is the railway that we need for the future. And now we've in effect got a more integrated picture with regard to the operator. How do we start building a conversation about not just status quo, but improvement? Because we've kind of been a bit in a retrenchment phase, haven't we? And we do need to get ourselves into a phase of thinking about improvement. So pick that up, I think, as we go through today. But future meetings, Steve.
Just a quick, because it's remiss of me to have omitted, the only trains that were running on time to schedule and without interruption were Merseyrail, which, you know, it shows you the dichotomy really between a national rail system that's failed, and if you get more devolved powers, that you can run services better locally.
So we've had Eurovision and Merseyrail's performance within my first 5 minutes as chair, and people are going to think I've got favouritism going on here.
Your independence is noted.
Okay, but thanks, Stephen. I'm sure colleagues will be happy for the minutes to be amended accordingly as requested. Thank you, everybody. Should we turn to item 5, which is a significant discussion that we need to have, in the spirit of what I was just saying a moment ago about getting back to thinking about how do we improve the railway rather than getting it back to a stable position. So I'm going to invite David Hogarth to speak to this item in a moment, but this is an opportunity for us today to feed into the 24-25 planning cycle, because that's obviously what we're discussing today. The kind of, I think, the starting point that we've been told is it's going to be difficult in terms of the finance available, and it's a must-have rather than would like to have type approach. But you know, I think we all would want to kind of always challenge that, you know, one planning assumption for the whole country, because as I said at the start, the railway in the north, it is not like it is in all parts of the country. If we suffer cuts, those cuts can leave whole communities completely isolated and without a railway service, given our bare bones system that we, well, in places where it is a very much a bare bones system. And I think we need to be getting back into a discussion about improvement, recognising that our railway, I think if I'm still not mistaken, has recovered better than the railway in other parts of the country. So, you know, we've seen particularly the leisure traffic, for probably the reason Steve was talking about before, you know, really come back strong. So, you know, we need to make the case within this process for that resurgent railway and continuing that growth. I think before I do invite David, it's just one other point of context I think that's worth bearing in mind. I think the industry would say that the December 22 timetable has been successfully introduced, and I think the figures bear that out, don't they? And I think maybe David will come to them. But there's just one, which is there was a predicted or expected reduction in lateness of 20%, but it's actually a 40% reduction that's been achieved. That says to me maybe that there's been over caution possibly, and maybe it was justified in the circumstances, but it kind of says maybe there's space to build back up from where we got to in December 22, recognising that certainly authorities in my area, but I know that'll be true elsewhere, feel that they've been significantly disadvantaged. And I certainly know Mayor Coppard will say that the Sheffield City region has been disadvantaged, particularly with connectivity to Manchester Airport. So I think those kind of points are kind of important really as we start to think about the planning for 24-25. And with that, I'll pause, David, and hand the floor to you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I won't say too much more really, but I think just to emphasise, this is a real opportunity by virtue of us being part of the realm of partnership, basically. We don't have this opportunity in the same way with other operators, but we can genuinely set down our priorities alongside DFT's priorities as the other partner to shape Northern and TransPennine for next year. We're doing it at the start of the process, which is good. As the Chair said, last year was particularly dominated by the discussion around service cuts and finances. I think it's fair to say we arrived at a good position thanks to the work of the committee and others in making that case. We ended up in a position where broadly the same level of service was operated, or is being operated this year, but it's not the enhanced services, it's not back to some of the levels we were pre-COVID. Of course, markets have changed, that's the other big thing as well, so the exact same services will not be appropriate. But it's worth acknowledging that we did end up at that position, which was probably slightly better position than we feared at points during the year. But it's an opportunity to shape that process at 3 key stages. We're very much at the first stage of setting out what we want to see. We will then have a specification going out to operators through the Rail North Partnership around about September, and then we'll have those plans come back in December, January, and there'll be an opportunity to shape that now. So we want to make sure we can influence at all three stages. What we plan to do, Chair, or suggesting we do, is re-establish the members' working group on business planning to do that. Worked quite well last year. We had 3 members of that working group that covered the different geographies. So we had a member from the northwest, sort of Yorkshire and Central area, and northeast. Is Councillor Gannon and Councillor Hinchcliffe, actually 2 of those members. So if we could re-establish that to give us guidance and provide input in between these meetings, I think that would be really, really helpful. So that's one of the things we're looking for. And I think more importantly, really looking for your guidance and your agreement on a set of priorities that we can put very clearly in the workshops that some of the officers will be attending, and we can put back to the department as part of the Rail North Partnership discussions as well. We've set out some overarching priorities in the report, which fundamentally take us back to delivery of the Strategic Transport Plan, which I think is the reason that Transport for the North is here, delivering the economic, social and decarbonisation priorities, and making sure that what the operators are doing is set in that context. Obviously supporting the major projects, including development of NPR, and facilitating mode shift by making those journeys much easier, things like integrated ticketing, which progress has been relatively slow in recent years, to be honest on. So making sure that operators have that built into their plans. In 310, we give more detail, so it's points 1 to 8 actually, specifically looking for comment and agreement on. I won't go through all of those because you can see them in the report, but I'll just highlight. We have suggested number 1 is performance recovery over and above everything else. I think that's absolutely fundamental. Of course, it's not just TransPennine. Northern have been on a journey of recovering performance as well, and there's still more work to be done there. We've highlighted as well getting back to the quantum of services at least before COVID, deliberately worded like that. It's not necessarily the exact services, but to work with operators on how we can actually take advantage of emerging markets. I know that's something Nick Donovan's going to talk about in his presentation later on as well. And then the final one I draw particular attention to is making sure those social and economic benefits are taken into account, that it isn't just driven by financial requirements, important though that is, that actually this is about delivering for the economy and wider social needs as well. So, looking for committee to discuss and hopefully give us an endorsed set of priorities that we can take into those discussions, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, David. That's really clear. It's helpful to have this sort of kind of ability to think about all of those issues. Just on the ticketing side of things, we're progressing well in our discussions. It was called GBR Transition Team. I think it's still called that, isn't it? The whole notion of our trailblazer ambitions around pathfinder lines that we could use to start looking at integrated ticketing. So obviously, just from a Greater Manchester perspective, we would support that being a priority within this. Obviously, going to open the floor to colleagues who wish to come in on this item. While we await for I'll come to Susan. Then there's a point I will pick up in a second. But.
I'm happy to start off, Chair, thank you. A few things. I'm pleased to hear you talk about the social impacts of this as well, because I think too frequently it's all about the finance, and obviously we know Treasury a big driver behind this. But actually stopping rail services and disconnecting communities from growth is terribly damaging for our economy and our country. And I noticed in your template at 3.5 there, it doesn't really talk about levelling up really. albeit in 3.10, you've got a acknowledgement in number 4 there of socials. I just wondered how the business plan sort of reflects the priorities, and obviously you spoke about it then, but it probably needs embedding a little bit more strongly in the wiring of the work. Come back on that, and I've got a few other things.
Yeah, just on that one in particular, I think probably you kind of raised a kind of fundamental point really. The template in 3.5 is the national template that operators have been given to work with. So it's our opportunity to change that in the north in the way that we see fit and put that to DFT. Yeah.
So that would be great if we could lobby for the change of that, of course, because that is very, old school, isn't it, that really? Now we're much more about making sure all parts of the economy are connected to opportunity. Obviously we note the improvements in the service. However, there are some services significantly in West Yorkshire that are still not in place. So we've got the Huddersfield-Wakefield, we're still waiting for confirmation that's going to go back. And of course, the Bradford-Foster Square Ilkley-Skipton service is still under par from what it should be and what it was pre-pandemic. So I'd like some assurance that if there is capacity, we can put those back now by 20, because there was a commitment that we would look at that. Well, you would look at that again for put them back in 2023. And I think also I just want some commitment that there's going to be no further changes or detriment to services in that December 23 timetable as well, because we can't go backwards. We need to put back what should be there and then go forwards to try and make sure that more people are connected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. It's a really important point you've just raised, so maybe I'll come in on the back of it. So I think you're right. I think we need to look at the position in terms of where lost out in December 22, because a lot of places did lose out. And if we have got a kind of slack that's been created by the kind of, let's say, understandable, cautious approach to the December 22 timetable, if it's really reduced that lateness so much more than expected, it does imply that services could be reinstated without risking well, maybe, but it does imply to us. And I think what we're going to ask the industry to do is look at the scope for that as part of this planning process, because we have to push as hard as we can for those communities without an adequate service, and obviously from a Sheffield point of view, I'm sure Oliver would say that. And then the question will come, well, how could they be funded? And I just would want to say something at this stage about the potential, you would hope, for some efficiency of having both of the operators in operator of last resort. I think it would be the view of Transport for Greater Manchester that there's been duplication within the two operators as they were formerly constituted, and there may be now an opportunity to look at efficiency, and maybe, I don't know if this is too quick, but looking at some of the slightly more unwieldy services that we've had across the north, and whether there's a chance to sort of, not think about it through the lens that they were looking at it, about long services that picked up, lots of different routes and passengers along the way, and perhaps a more kind of less risky timetable that's not so many long services. And within that context, Steve and I would have an interest in the Northwest regional business unit, which we're establishing, so that they can sort of feed into that as well. So there are opportunities here in this planning cycle that weren't available to us before. Knowledge of December 22 and the success, you might say, in terms of how that's been introduced, although it's a qualified success for the areas that lost out. The opportunity for efficiency within the railway operations that we've now got, and then obviously the focus that comes with the Northwest business unit. Shall I just turn to our chair for a moment?
Thank you, Chair. You basically summed up in a way some of the points I wanted to make, because I don't see a contradiction sort of reading across from 3.5, the national sort of guidelines, to what Councillor Hinchcliffe was just saying a few moments ago, because I think in the revenue plan that there ought to be a better opportunity to look for revenue growth as well, which helps provide other services that might be needed. And I just wondered, perhaps a bit later on from the operators, when we could sort of talk about some of those opportunities which may come. And bearing, one of, I think now the it's slightly wider, but it does refer to some of the work we did previously about station redevelopment. Is I think going to be something that is an opportunity now. A lot of the stations will be just solely served by the operators of last resort as far as the consumer approach is concerned. So I think that's something that is there to be worked on very much over the next six months, to say this could be an opportunity which we should try and grasp and develop. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Mayor Driscoll.
Thanks, Andy. When we're talking about revenue growth, when we're talking about passenger experience, I think one of the simplest things is to make it simple for the travelling public. And we've got to see that from a public passenger point of view, the railways is just one component. Yes, this is the Rail North Committee, but we're also part of Transport for the North. So if you can get on your bus or your tram or your metro and integrate that into the railways, then that's how ultimately we're going to see better passenger numbers, more revenue, and it's the simplicity and integration. Now, that's not something that we're going to achieve in 1 year, we know that. But in Manchester, bus franchising, everybody else is certainly looking at it, even if they're not going to have it delivered anytime soon. That, I think, is the message that we need to be out there to the public, to make sure that from wherever you're going to the other end, you can get through. And ideally, when you can have everything on one ticket, on a phone, or a debit card, that's when we'll see the numbers really bounce back. So that's got to be the holy grail, hasn't it?
For certain. I mean, I think the model in Greater Manchester that we're working towards is, you know, a fully integrated model that brings more people to all modes and is genuinely about getting people to change behaviour and leave the car at home, and rail then becomes a beneficiary of that. And I think the risk, if I'm being honest, in this kind of first meeting is that rail doesn't move quick enough, and therefore rail doesn't capture the moment. Because as we move towards the implementation of the B network in September this year, it's a generational moment where you can say to people, look, there's a different offer. You know, we're going to publish a new fare structure later this month that will be bus and tram integrated. And it's a chance to really get the excitement of the change driving up those passenger volumes. And it's why the rail offer needs to come in, you know, as close as we can to full B network, which will be tap in, tap out, and that will be 5th of January 2025. And rail needs to be not massively out with that. I mean, it maybe struggle to hit that timetable, but it can't be massively out with that timetable. Otherwise, the rail industry won't capture the uplift that could come. Oh, my apologies.
No.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, well, firstly, on your point about kind of rail not going fast enough, I think that's absolutely right. I think we need to see sort of progress relatively swiftly because, as you say, people are genuinely trying to return to the service and want to be able to use trains and want to be able to use alternative modes of transport right across our regions, and therefore anything we can do to kind of encourage that activity is welcome. I think from South Yorkshire's perspective, absolutely welcome the direction of travel. We get into bad puns, don't we, when we do this? Welcome the direction of travel, apologies, and recognise absolutely that we can't kind of hark back necessarily to kind of pre-COVID positions and just ask for everything that we had pre-COVID to be returned. I understand that we're in a different world with a different landscape, but there are some services that certainly in South Yorkshire we would absolutely want to see restored, or at the very least movement towards, not least Sheffield to Gainsborough stopping services, Sheffield to Doncaster stopping services, etc. So welcome the direction of travel, absolutely recognise the challenges that we face, but there are also things that we would like to be able to kind of make some progress on relatively swiftly and have the opportunity to engage with operators and others as those decisions are being made. Thank you very much.
That's a entirely legitimate call, Oliver. Richard?
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. First of all, what Susan was saying, and sorry, that's perfect time, isn't it? First of all, what Susan's saying, and what Patrick was saying as well, that it just shows how important that prioritisation coming from the people around this table is in the process. Because The prioritisation that you have is not the prioritisation that would get to the top of the list in terms of the business plan discussions we would have at the DFT. It is so important that your voice is strong in that, because there's always a danger when we say it, well, it's just the operator saying, yeah, no, it's not us, it's you that need to push that. So it's really important. And I can't let you say what you said about 40% increase without saying something about that. The MLTF process, the regional task force process, did a very long, involved analysis to get there. It is a textbook case of actually getting everybody around the table to talk about it and actually get to a good answer, as opposed to somebody just banging in an answer because they thought it was the right thing to do. It worked well because everybody was involved in putting it together. I would be very wary of saying, therefore, the improvement of performance equals the ability to use the capacity more. No. This was about using the capacity we've got well, structurally well, in order to improve performance. That doesn't mean the capacity has improved.
That's me told in my first meeting as chair. But no, and I probably should say it's a moment when we've got these figures to congratulate the partners and the industry and what was done there, because it clearly has been an exercise that has delivered. Of course, these benefits are being felt by our residents, so it's important to put that on the record. I guess, though, it is the role of this committee to do what Oliver was doing, which is to say the industry can't live in a steady state. Oh, well, we're okay again now. Because obviously there were communities that lost out to achieve those figures. And I guess, I don't know if members agree with this as a sort of, I'll come to Darren in a second, but it almost would help, I think, as part of this to work out which areas genuinely most lost out. And I think if the committee could try and get some sort of prioritisation about if there is limited scope to put a service in here or there, that we at least have some criteria, maybe some criteria perhaps, as to which would be the ones that we as a committee would then say, okay, well, that one goes back in based on, the loss of connectivity and the socially essential nature of rail travel in those particular areas. I think that's a reasonable, balancing that with the economic side of it and the business case for doing it, of course. But does that sound a fair point?
The prioritisation coming from you is much more powerful than anything we can do.
I'll come to Susan first, and then I'll come to you.
I think it's important that we lobby DFT strongly around social inclusion, diversity in their decision making, because otherwise, I've seen the history of West Yorkshire and the fact that train services over the decades have been cut back slightly here, slightly there, and then you end up with no connectivity at all. And there has to be a point when we say no more. And I think, therefore, the prioritisation that we as the North put on that needs to be heard loudly and needs to be also reflected in the settlement that operators get from government, because obviously, none of us want to see a detriment to services in London, but there does seem to be a completely different planet, actually, when you go to London from a transport point of view to north of England. And as the chair said, we have seen rail services used much more here in the recovery than in other places. So the money should follow that, really. And I just want to really emphasise that that's hugely important for us in the north, that case is made strongly, that the template includes more strongly, social inclusion, diversity in some of these decisions, because I think we can't do without that. We can't just let it slide gradually to detriment. And nobody came back on the commitment that no detriment in December 23 as well, by the way.
That's not a commitment I can give until we've gone through the planning process. In the end of the day, the timetable specification is given to the operators at the end of the planning process. So it's not. I don't know whether anybody else on this side of the table, but I don't think we are in a position to commit to anything going up or anything going down.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the words actually, diversity, because I'm minded looking down this table. There are well, as far as I'm aware, 2 minority ethnic people, 1 woman. I think it is not necessarily a huge surprise that therefore, as a result, some of the decisions that are being made by this industry are not necessarily recognising the diversity of our community. So I just gently make that point.
Thank you, Chair. On point 3.10, we've attempted to include all the prioritisation in there. I think that's a very good starting point, but clearly given the strength of feeling around the table today, my suggestion would be that we take this away, we look to strengthen some of those areas and to do some further work on that, do a degree of finessing around that. I think that we've got quite a lot in there that picks up the points that have been raised by various members, but I think we can certainly just strengthen that and then bring that back to this group.
Okay. And is September okay for that in terms of the site, the planning time frame?
I would like to think we can do it well in advance of that.
Yep. Okay. Jamie?
Thanks. We've been talking about social exclusion, opening up opportunities to disadvantaged communities. There's a wonderful opportunity coming up in the North East with the opening up of the Northumberland line from Ashington through Blythe into Newcastle. Northern have that franchise, so it's in the operator of last resort. This is an opportunity to actually get something right from the beginning, and particularly that integration piece, working with the Tyne-and-Wear Metro and getting the ticketing right so that people can integrate it and see rail as just another part of the transport system. Everything that Susan was talking about reaching disadvantaged communities, there's loads of stuff we can do there. And the flexibility, particularly on how people buy their tickets, how they can use them, and the ability to do the right kind of incentivisation. This is a golden moment because it's new. You're not inheriting a load of stuff.
Thanks, Jamie. Nick? So just briefly.
Yeah, sorry,
Gil.
Can I just ask one other question as well? I just wondered what flexibility TPE will now have in relation to what happened with Northern last year as far as the cut price flash sale you did on online tickets. And have you got any flexibility to try and sort of promote schemes like that under what you've already been sort of allocated?
And maybe even integrated with offers between the two. Yeah.
I just wondered what the sort of availability in the contract was as far as that was concerned.
We've not been charged with doing anything different in the transfer. What I will say is that we try within what we're calling Operation Last Resort very hard to actually put forward revenue generating schemes both in LNER and Northern, and we will look to do so in TPE2, and the integration where possible with local schemes is absolutely, I completely agree with the if you like, the articulation of I've lost the word, coordinated transport, you know what I mean, I've lost the word. So integrated transport. So I completely agree with that. There's nothing, we're under no instruction, but our instinct will always be to try to push to do more revenue earning schemes, and it's remarkably difficult to achieve.
Could I just throw in, though, and on the back of what Patrick has said, I will come to you, Nick, not at this, given that there is time, not to lose the opportunity for some innovation in pricing, because, okay, we all look at Germany, and we're not asking you to necessarily be able to replicate an offer of that kind, but we could nudge towards it. If there was an all-operator day ticket, I don't know, whether those kind of ideas, at least, could be, if not, I don't know, but I just think there's...
As a general rule, I would say it's much more productive to try and talk about regional and local schemes than trying to shift the whole of the ticketing system of the whole of the railways, which is what GBRTT are charged with doing. And that's a monumental job. And you can take forever on that. Actually, trying to do things locally is actually where the secret is.
Right. But at least if we can have a focus on patronage, build back, innovation in the, I think that would be something that the committee would support. Nick?
So just 2 points if I may. So picking up on the
general ticketing point, I'll say music to my ears. Actually, the Mayor Driscoll's point around the opportunity in the Northumberland line is something that we very much see, and we are actively in discussions around pay-as-you-go and integrated ticketing and that GBRTT piece. So I'm not sure we can deliver it, but it's certainly something that is clearly on the front of our minds as well in terms of a golden opportunity for the Northumberland line. And the second point I thought would be useful to come back is on the December 23 timetable. We have been working with the officer reference group in terms of that timetable within the budgetary constraints that we've got, and with Rail North Partnership to align the resource within those financial constraints to do the best we can December 23. Largely the direction of travel is that the DEC 23 timetable will stay as is from the May 23 timetable. Of course, in May 23 there were some adjustments I think the committee is aware of, such as the additional Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Chester service at a weekend, which is proving to be very successful. So we made adjustments in May. For Northern, the direction of travel at the moment is more or less status quo into December, other than the moving around of some resource to balance capacity and demand better within that financial envelope that we're working. But we continue to work with the officer reference group in terms of the detail around that. Thanks very much, Nick. So positive news there. I suppose before I wrap up on this item, I just probably need to come back to you, Richard, and say that this could be a difficult planning round, couldn't it, given the steers that have already been given. We've got a job to do as a committee to make the case for the Northern Railway, having, for the reasons I gave earlier, having bounced back and also being more crucial to some of our communities. Can you say anything about whether OLR could offer up an efficiency gain from the two sides of the system being in OLR because of the reduction of duplication that we could then kind of realise in this time frame, and therefore that could be part of a funding package that supports the ambitions that you've heard around this table?
I think what the opportunity allows us is more joined up working, more joined up thinking, more cooperation and collaboration. The degree to which that translates into more money to play with, I doubt. One of the things that I'll say it now, we are not merging Northern and TPE. They remain separate companies. They must remain separate companies because it's not our job to merge them unless somebody tells us to. We get given that to manage, you manage that, not something different. So unless somebody somewhere else decides they want them merged, we will operate them separately and independently. They have different characteristics, Northern and TPE. TPE is essentially an east-west intercity operator. Northern is a network of services. So there were reasons that they were separated. There may be good reasons to put them back together again, but that's not in our remit at the moment. One day they might get put back together. That's not in our remit and not on our time horizon at the moment. So we will, as we have done in other places, emphasise to these two gentlemen who know each other far better than I do, that cooperative and collaborative working is the way forward, and that includes with yourselves and with Network Rail and TRU and everybody else. So that is the way we get things done. But that won't necessarily generate funds for other things. And I'm trying to be honest.
Oh, and we appreciate honesty at this committee. And then probably should have said at the start, congratulations, if that is the correct word, to Chris Jackson. TransPennine Trains now, is that TPT we call the operator now?
TransPennine Trains is its legal name. You have to have a different legal entity to move things into. It will continue to trade under TransPennine Express because that's what it is. TransPennine Trains is the legal entity, just as we just refer to Northern, not Northern Trains
We remain
Limited.
TBE. So, yeah. But no, I mean it without any nothing sort of glib about it. You know, speaking for Greater Manchester, we were genuinely pleased to see your appointment, Chris. I think that will be shared by colleagues around the table. So you're entering the role with great support from this committee. And while you know, we're going to come on to some of the challenges that you might have, you just need to know that you've got our support as you address them. David, obviously it's been a good discussion, that, and an important one, because we're trying to get back into an improvement discussion, aren't we, about the railways. Darren made a good suggestion about strengthening those criteria on the back of the conversation you've heard. I would even say maybe adding specific, let's be honest, this committee sometimes needs to get more into saying, right, is it this or this? And, you know, giving as clear a steer as we can. So services that, you know, prioritisation of improvements, I think, is the realms we should be in. We should make your life easy, shouldn't we? And just say, this is what we would prioritise, and we try and give and take amongst ourselves. And I think TFN as a body needs to do that more, actually. You know, in a limited sort of set of resources and circumstances, which ones will we trade off with each other and agree on? So I think, you know, the more you could serve up some of those things to us, the more I as chair would want to prompt those type of discussions. Nick?
Just an observation that hopefully helpful is, I think within that, think the long term, the 2, 3, 5, 10 year period, because there are many conversations in the moment about services, and I think one of the things that sometimes doesn't get forgotten, but we can easily forget, is the timeline for planning service changes is often very long. So if you look at the December 22 timetable, that was, what, 2 years, 2 or 3 years in the planning. So I think looking that long-term piece and that mindset would be good.
Sure, just
if you would, David, and would you just pick up Lord McLaughlin's point about stations?
Yes.
Because obviously there is an opportunity with stations that maybe wasn't available to us before.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think there's an opportunity where we will get challenged back on priorities, so that's good. And I think there's actually been some good work done already, actually in relation to Manchester, but this can be applied across the north as well on how we prioritise. Because if we put this proposition to Rail North Partnership and operators, they'll come back with options basically to prioritise. So we can definitely do that. Stations I had put in the list actually. I think there's a real opportunity there to work. I think particularly with Northern. Yeah, so Northern have been working on something called Stations as a Place to develop the whole station concept and embed them as much more as part of the community, modernise retailing, that sort of thing, but actually just make stations a destination place much more, which we've looked at and been supportive of. I think there's an opportunity to work now with TransPennine on similar. I mean, they've got fewer number of stations in the north, but to work right across the two. So again, we can make that a feature of the plan for sure. The only other thing I'd say is I think this is going to move sort of quite fast. I think having that working group to look at what we put back and look at priorities is going to be important. It's not a formal group. You don't need to agree membership today, but I think if we follow that up with through the officers to try and get 3 members to form that group and meet fairly quickly.
Thank you. Thanks, David. And thanks, everybody. I'd just be grateful if you don't lose the point about the North West Regional Business Unit, which is coming through as well. I know Mayor Rotherham and I are keen on the idea of whether or not there could be more scope for Manchester-Liverpool shuttle rather than the ones that have to go all over the north, and maybe Manchester-Leeds. I don't know. You know, this type of thinking is, if it can't be delivered in the time frame that we're looking at here, at least started to be developed, because I think if we had more of those type of services that are city-to-city shuttles rather than northern trains always going up and down across everywhere, that sometimes I think builds in the problem.
Just to add, I think part of in the announcement for the transfer of TPE to operator of last resort, there is a review that we are all being asked to contribute to, and I think we're clear. We've got a lot of evidence data. That review is looking, you know, partly longer term as well. So I think that is the real opportunity to see how services could be reshaped, not for December or probably not even May next year, but over the next few years.
Good. Everybody happy with that discussion? Steve?
Just because it hasn't been mentioned, look, it's great, isn't it, that we're making stations places, and that'll animate those places and possibly make them more safer, which is great. What we need to do, though, is make them more accessible. And it'd be interesting to see how many of our stations that we're talking about across the north are fully accessible for passengers. I bet it's a really low figure.
No, it's a very important point. Disability access is something we have to talk about a lot more, and we will do. Now, there's no comment on what's gone before, but we will now. I just want to make that clear. That has to be a bigger priority. We can't just focus on running services when a large number of our residents can't even get in to get on those services. So, that does have to feature much more in our thinking and in our discussions. And I'll be talking to Martin about how we take forward more, and the chair about how we take forward more work on that. We were after members of a working group, weren't we? Do we have anyone who wants to volunteer for that today? Thank you, Susan. Thank you. That's really appreciated.
Yes.
Martin. Very good.
I was there, so I'm volunteering.
We need a west of Pennine's volunteer.
Lancashire.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, great. Well, there's the three then. Thanks very much, colleagues. So is that everything we need from that discussion? Yeah, excellent. So let's move on then to item 6, infrastructure and future service development. We had a big announcement, what was it, one ago, around infrastructure in Manchester, that it doesn't just matter to us, it does matter to everybody, which was welcome as far as it went, but there was other stuff built into that. We just need to unpack a little bit today, as well as other issues across the whole network. So Charlie, I think you're going to introduce this item for us. Sorry, Charlie, you're there. Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you. So the report's quite encompassing. It covers a lot of infrastructure right across the geography of the north. I will take it as read, and I'm keen that we get some time for discussion on this rather than reviewing the report in committee. I think it's important to tease out that based on the discussions that we've heard this morning, the crave for service increases and the connectivity that it brings can't be delivered without infrastructure investment, and they go hand in hand with rolling stock procurement. It's really crucial that we get these integrated programmes working effectively, so that we avoid repeats of what we're seeing in May 18, where you don't sync up the new services with the infrastructure. The report notes several pieces of infrastructure development that are underway, and that's welcome news, and a piece of work by the industry on the indicative train service specification for 2032. That's very much seen as a key intervention point for the industry, and the work towards that is assessing how well the infrastructure that's in development answers the service requirements that are intended at that point. What I'm keen to draw out from today and the discussion that we want is around Manchester. As you know, Chair, there was an announcement of funding recently for the next configuration state in Manchester that delivers improvements to the north side, that will bring further capacity increases, enhanced performance, but it is a step on the road. It is not the total solution for Manchester. There is a lot more work to be done. We note that the performance improvements from December 22 have been significant, but they have come at a cost of connectivity. And what we must do is continue to press for the infrastructure investment that gives that connectivity back and lets the services get to the state that they need to be in, and prepare the network for the future with the major schemes coming on stream, including HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, Hope Valley Upgrade. There is a myriad of schemes that are developing that, unless we get the ends of either route right, can't realise the benefits. So what that brings us to is some statutory advice updates that we're proposing. There was some statutory advice issued by Transport for the North back in 2020 that made recommendations for interventions in Manchester. What we've seen in the period since then is that the plans have moved on. The outcomes that are needed are changing, and therefore we need to update that statutory advice, particularly pertinent is the withdrawal of the Transport and Works Act order in Manchester that was referenced as a key point of the previous advice. So the new advice that has been drafted seeks to switch from outputs to outcomes, and the intention of that is to remain relevant for longer. So we want to make sure that we're pushing for the outcomes that the passengers need and pressing for whatever it takes to meet those. So rather than specifying a list of infrastructure, we just need to keep pressing until we get those outcomes for connectivity, growth, performance and reliability on the network. So very much welcome comments and feedback on the advice. It is drafted at this point. It will proceed through to TFM board later this month, but welcome comments from members.
Chair, before we take comments, can I just mention we've had a representation from Warrington. Cheshire and Potteries are not represented today. They couldn't make it today, but they just wanted committee to note that whilst they kind of recognise the work in Manchester, they have suffered reduction in connectivity and service opportunities, particularly as we know we've talked about that at this committee. So with the recommendation that suggests that we welcome that change, their suggestion is that the committee notes that rather than welcomes it.
Thank you, David. That's an amendment then to, there's a request for amendment to the paper. Yeah.
That can be amended as we take it forward to the board.
Thank you. I can't see any dissent from that, so we're set up.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. So given what Charlie just said, I think one of the key points is it's very much a draft document, this, and picking up from your comments earlier, Chair, around announcements, was it last week or the week before last, you know, we're aware that there are strong views, you know, around aspects of that, you know, and it is our expectation that we needed to bring this today to this group, but we do anticipate the need for potential finessing and strengthening of some of the remarks that we've made in that report. So, yeah, I wanted to say that before we got into the debate, because clearly things have moved on over the last 10 days or so, and we're very cognizant of that.
No, thank you very much, Darren. And obviously, I will want to say something on the back of that in respect to Manchester, but I do not want to abuse my position in the chair. If there's anyone else who wanted to come in, Oliver.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I mean, I hope what I'm about to say is more in admiration than jealousy, and I hope it's taken in that spirit. Just because I'm conscious that kind of the work being done on the Manchester Task Force, in contrast to some of the big challenges we face in South Yorkshire, and the progress which has quickly been made. And it's great to see, and it's important, and it absolutely is, and the investment that has now been made as a result. But some of the big challenges that we face in South Yorkshire maybe haven't kind of progressed in quite the same speed, and clearly the kind of Leeds area study and the work that we want to see there is part of that challenge. And then it is also just my regularly scheduled plea, and also thanks, because I recognise that the Sheffield to Manchester Airport link is part of this work. So just to say, kind of please do keep on trying to work on that development and delivery of the reinstatement of the link. It's really important to South Yorkshire, and thanks for the work that I know is going on to make that happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. Chair, Patrick.
Can I make one quick point and sort of seek a bit of clarification on 3.27 and 3.28. But bearing in mind how long these plans take and to get the necessary statutory orders, is there a bit more background as to why what was suggested in 2014 on a Transport and Works order is no longer appropriate and the right thing to do? And presumably a lot of money was spent securing that particular order and that particular note forward. I possibly even signed it off there, so I might. I may just need to declare an interest, Chair, but just in case. But I am slightly interested to understand a bit more of the background, because it is one of the difficulties about these sort of schemes that do take an inordinate amount of time and effort, and then to have to see them changed. How do we avoid that?
So if I can come back on that. So the Transport and Works Act order that we submitted back in 2014 covered what was known as Package C. So that was remodelling of Manchester Oxford Road to provide additional platforms, work on the corridor and additional platforms in Manchester Piccadilly 15 and 16. It didn't take into consideration the improvements that were needed on the areas around that corridor. It was very, very focused. And the work that's taken place since has identified that a lot of the issues causing congestion in Manchester stem from the routes that feed that corridor and the junctions that lead to it. And therefore, a broader package of work is needed that in some cases may negate the need for some of those works on the corridor. Not necessarily completely. You know, platform 15 and 16 could still be a solution for Manchester, but it's not necessarily the solution that's needed. In terms of the sort of withdrawal, because of the structure of the Transport and Works Act order, it covered both elements. With needing to change Oxford Road, you have to put a whole lot and then put a new process back in. So that's why it's 3.8. We're expecting, you know, there may be a new one that comes forward. But yeah, it was necessary to pull the old one to give that space to
I have
be
a
work.
particular interest in the Transport and Works Act because not only did I probably sign this order off, but I actually put the Act through in 1992, I think. If my memory serves me right, it was one of those acts that managed to just escape through according to the general election and didn't get any scrutiny at all in the House of Lords.
I'm meant to be in diplomatic mode today, but you really are showing your age today. That's true. And I was
acknowledging my age, showing it at home, Chair.
I wasn't going to mention whether this 2014 date may have involved your good self, but I guess I will just come in at this point just to say, you know, this is almost a decade since that went in, and that's a decade lost for the north of England, isn't it? It is for us, and Oliver, I do take your point, and you know, this model should be applied elsewhere, shouldn't it, if it does come up with the solution. But still, you know, this is a kind of the failure to progress. This is not good news for our residents. My worry in the paper, if I'm honest, is reference to a new baseline timetable in 3.7. It's almost like we're getting a reductionist sort of new reality when actually we were never, you know, this work was intended to allow an expanded timetable. So, you know, we are not moving from that. As I said at the very start of this meeting, we are not in any way going to back away from our ambitions of a railway that's at least as good in the north as it is everywhere else. So, you know, we would need reassurance on that point, that this is in no way diluting the ambition. For me, if I could just sort of point as well into the, you know, the time slips away a little bit. You know, what is the time frame for this kind of work to be completed and then, you know, a plan to be put on the table? We're pleased, as I said before, about configuration state 2 schemes, the schemes that were announced by the government recently. But we need to see the same pace in this work, because I was told, I think 4 years ago, there were alternatives to Package C, but I never saw them at that time. So it's a little bit deja vu, and it needs to, it really does need to speed up and get some focus into it. And the last point I would just make is, you know, in the statutory advice, it's very clear, isn't it, that they should increase capacity with no less than 16 trains per hour each way to operate reliably between Aldsall Lane Junction, Castlefield Junction and Manchester Piccadilly. So that was the same, if I'm right here, as Package C. Yep. That was the capacity uplift that was going to be delivered through Package C. So there's been no diminution here in the ambition. I just do need reassurance on that. For us as a city region, platforms 15 and 16 are very firmly on the table, and we would not remove our support for platforms 15 and 16. In fact, we would still support them, and we will take some convincing with a credible alternative to that before we would even begin to contemplate that they shouldn't be on the table, because it isn't just the capacity on the tracks, don't forget, it's the experience of the passengers who wait at those stations at Oxford Road and Piccadilly, and it's not a particularly positive experience late at night on platform 14. I can assure you it's not an easy place to board a train. So we will not be taking 15 and 16 off the table. We believe that they're still needed. We note Jim Bamford's comments reported that they're still needed, you know, in supporting the outcomes, which I accept, you know, the outcomes approach, but we're not backing off from our view at this point in any way that platforms 15 and 16 are not needed. We still believe they are needed. So I just do need to make that clear. Susan.
Yes, when I'm in conversations like this, I'm always reminded about the real reason we need Northern Powerhouse Rail going from Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, because all this is trying to wrestle with very old infrastructure and making it work for a modern economy, and it just doesn't fit, does it? However, we are where we are, and obviously welcome the approach that the task force has made. Obviously, any improvements made to Manchester also benefit the whole of the north. Actually, it's quite a crucial piece of infrastructure for us. Going on back of Mayor Coppard, I'd actually agree about the connectivity to Manchester Airport is what we all need, and I know it's mentioned in the letter that's going to Secretary of State, which I'm pleased to see. But there's this configuration state 3, which is a fabulous, easily accessible term, isn't it, really? You surely you can call it something sexier than that, to be quite honest. But anyway, this configuration state 3, could the airport connectivity be in that scoping of configuration state 3? Because that's obviously going to be the next iteration, isn't it, really? And I just wonder if that is something we could put in there to look at. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting though what is in scope, Susan, isn't it? Because we get under item 1, the Castlefield corridor, but reference is made to the Stockport area further on, and you know the Hope Valley line, because obviously that's critical for Oliver. So the question is, what is in? Because I was often explained to me that there were lots of pinch points around Manchester actually that were linked. So do we need to be clear about the scope for this configuration? So
CS3.
CS3. That's a bet. You've already improved it. Steve, were you wanting to come in?
Just to pick up on the point that Susan made just a little bit before CS3, which is around the very nature of these things are to try and bring us together, but we are all representatives of our individual areas, and it gets very parochial at times. You know, if there's money, everybody wants it for their area, and yet this is something that does benefit the whole of the north, and that's, I think, needs to be teased out more, that whilst Manchester's mentioned an awful lot, actually the benefits are to everybody, to the travelling public across. Yeah, that's the bottleneck. Yeah, well, Manchester normally does cause problems, but it's the bottleneck, and those issues need to be tackled. That will then allow people from, say, my area or Sheffield, whatever, to travel more freely across the north. I think that just needs to be teased out a little bit more, because the general public might not fully appreciate all of the nuances of that.
I think that's a really helpful point, and thank you to you for making it. It's a critical point. There's reference in the note to it's arguable that Stockport should be formally identified as congested infrastructure. Could we have more of an explanation about that? Is it congested infrastructure or is it not?
So on Stockport, the concern is the limitations that could arise as you start to run HS2 classic compatible services through that part of the network in the interim between phase 2A and phase 2B of HS2 being built. So the timetable for HS2 services isn't nailed down. It's still up for debate, but there is an expectation that there could be too many trains through that part of the infrastructure.
How does the Hope Valley line play into that question? Because clearly we already have made the investment in the Hope Valley line. That investment currently, as far as I understand it, is idle. So what was that, £125 million of investment, which is currently not usable because of those blockages? How does that play into your calculation and in correlation with, potentially in competition with HS2 service?
Absolutely, that is a critical part of it. That there are a number of trains that are all competing to get through from Stockport to Piccadilly on that part of the network that is going to be over capacity if we're not careful, particularly for realising things like the third fast path down the Hope Valley.
But isn't it because Oliver's not had the uplift on his new infrastructure, that it's because it's already congested infrastructure?
There are limitations now, yes.
But I think this is the thing, this is an important point, this, because, you know, Oliver was making a point before about when are we going to be prioritised. And I remember it being put to me that when Castlefield was officially designated congested infrastructure, then finally it flashes up in the department. And, you know, if Stockport is Oliver's problem, doesn't it need that? Rather than arguable, shouldn't we be clearer now that this is congested?
I think that's the question I'm trying to get to the bottom, just because I'm conscious that HS2 is going to be a priority, right? And there is a danger that, again, that upgrade that has already been put in gets lost in some of these conversations. I'm just looking for a bit of reassurance, I suppose.
Chair, I think there's probably technicality that we're trying to kind of jump over, really, because technically if plans aren't in for those services, then it's not congested. But the point we're making is we don't need to wait for those plans to come in. We already know it's congested. So we are suggesting that point is made to the Secretary of State as part of the statutory advice.
David, could you just clarify for me? Is there an absolutely clear definition, DFT definition, of what is congested infrastructure?
I think it's sorry, I think it's actually a ORR definition, isn't it? And it's a network rail. So there is a definition. We can check that. But I think it's based on services that run or are in the planning process to be run. I think that's the difference. We're anticipating things in the future.
I'm hoping to try to help Sheffield with this, but it is, and ourselves, of course, but is it possible for you to bring back to this committee, and before this advice is finalised, before it goes to TFM board, clarity on this issue? Is this congested or is it not? And shouldn't, even if it's a borderline case, arguable either way, I think we should be arguing that it should be designated congested infrastructure as... I
think the point is, yes, we can, in the board report, bring that definition. I think the point remains that we are saying it should be, and we'll make that clearer in the statutory advice.
Thank you, David. You okay with that, Oliver? Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, I was just, if you recall, in 2018, the Central Manchester was declared congested. The difference there was that Network Rail had accepted all those trains into the plan. So it was congested because they'd accepted all these trains into the plan, and lo, it didn't work. Oops, it's congested. I think the difference here is people recognising that this is going to be horribly congested if we do all this. It's not congested, but it's going to be. So it's back to your point about making it clear.
Well, Richard, it must be congested if Oliver can't unlock new infrastructure, or correct? Surely.
Somewhere in the plumbing, there isn't capacity. Identifying which bit in the plumbing is the capacity problem is what congested infrastructure is about. In Central Manchester was a block in the plumbing which needed to be fixed. But actually the way we fixed Manchester through the MRTF was largely through the restructuring of the timetable, not by adding additional capacity.
But we don't necessarily think that's a fix.
I understand that. I understand that. But that's where we are with this one too. Actually, I don't think, and this is me talking, not the chairman of DOHL talking. I don't think we can fix the Sheffield problem without additional capacity. It's not a timetabling issue.
That's my understanding. I do. I mean, look, there's no point kind of breaking over the past. I'm not sure why we put in £125 worth of investment into the Hope Valley line without understanding what we were going to do on either end of that. And it's the point that I know you've made previously, Andy, about kind of essentially a car park that's full, and yet we're building roads into it. And so I guess I would just like to understand what the plan is in place in order to unlock that connectivity. And if you, as you are saying, there are challenges along that route, I think they are relatively well known and well understood, and if they're not, I'd like to understand how we're going to better understand them.
Please, Martin.
Can I just make an observation, Chair? 'Cause I want to come back to the point I think you made right at the very start about how we need to be thinking about planning for growth. And we've seen in the draft strategic transport plan how we set out, you have set out your ambitions as leaders about the economy, society and environmental benefits. And I think if you're happy to, Chair and committee members, can you let us take this one away and just have a bit more of a think about it? Because I think what you're highlighting is another challenge with the current structure. The definition of congested infrastructure is by ORR. The response too often is, how do we cut the timetable to make it uncongested, which is the challenge we found in the Castleford corridor. What we're saying, I think, as a committee, as TFNN, is actually, here's the demand that needs to be accommodated. The fact that it's congested means we need to make the investment rather than using it as a limitation to trim the time. I think that's where you're collectively coming from today, and that's what's been reflected in the strategic transport plan. And I think it illustrates to me how TFN perhaps has got an opportunity to help put forward some ideas about how we make the system work better in advance of any legislation that may or may not come for GBR. I think this is actually quite a key issue you've hit upon. So, Chair, if you're happy to leave us with that, because I think there is something here about the relationship with ORR, investment and what have you, that you've hit upon, which we do need to come back and let us, if you may, come back to you on that.
Yeah, I'd be really grateful if you would, Martin. It was always put to me, my team always said, you've got Castlefield, but Stockport's not much better. You know, and that's what was always said. So, and I'm fully prepared to accept there may be other areas in scope that might tilt more towards West Yorkshire or Lancashire. You know, so the pinch points are around the city as well as within it, aren't they? And you know, I think if you could bring us back that work, it would be helpful, I think. Susan?
So can I just follow up on my question about CS3 and what's in it, and whether the airport connectivity, obviously Sheffield, Bradford, Leeds has gone down to 1 train an hour now from 2 trains an hour, you know, whether that could be put in scope of that CS3 work.
Can we say more about that, David?
So I think, but the statutory advice is intending to put all of that in scope, because we're mentioning specifically airport connectivity. Yeah. The thing here is the CS3 is about a set of infrastructure. It's going to improve the capability through central Manchester. How we use that capability is a choice that we will have, that the task force will wrestle with. We are putting down a marker of what we want to see, but I think those choices will still come back. It comes back to the Chair's point about having some criteria that we can apply against those choices where we trade off capacity, connectivity and reliability.
Yes,
But
yes.
Martin, what you're saying is that you'll bring us back more detail underneath us as to what schemes fall in if you're going to meet these objectives, these outcomes that we're...
I think, Chair, I think the advice to you and the advice that will be given to the board is that if you're clear on the outcomes, it automatically brings these things into scope, because you're defining that what you want to achieve is the improved connectivity to the airport, is about these outcomes. And I think what we're then saying is that's a really strong marker. It's a consistent marker that actually sets a long-term requirement about growth and investment in growth, which the industry then needs to be responding to. And I think, Chair, what I would also think we need to reflect upon before the board paper is maybe putting a bit of a time frame on some of these sort of reactions. So we've done an awful lot of work around some of these bottlenecks. We ought to be able to come to an idea about what is it the way forward relatively quickly, I would have thought, at least as a direction of travel. And so I think maybe we just need to reflect as a team on the comments we've had today, and potentially put some sort of time bound on when we think some reaction to this might come forward.
When is this going to the main board?
It's currently scheduled to go in 2 weeks' time at the 22nd of June, Chair.
We don't have a great deal of time, do we? And it's pretty critically important. But can that be done meaningfully within that time frame?
What I would say on that is I think that, you know, realistically that gives us not much more than a week in terms of getting the actual papers, you know, ready for board. So I think realistically we can't achieve all that I think this committee would like within that time frame. So I think we can certainly you know, put some strength around this and some further work which gives guidelines to it. but I don't think it's realistic to pretend here today that, you know, within the next 10 days or so, we could do the work justice on this. So I think there's a little bit of an issue there. You know, one possible suggestion is that we do the work that we can and we share it with this group, and then potentially it goes to board, but for information with the knowledge that there'll be a further iteration of this. I think one of the key issues for us is, say for example, connectivity to the airport. You know, I think we all know that it's a nettle that needs to be grasped. That across the north there's an aspiration, an understandable aspiration for connectivity to the airport, but we know that that's going to be extremely difficult to achieve. So we're doing some work around that, looking at what could or couldn't happen, and that's the type of work that we're doing, trying to be a little bit proactive, which we'll be working through the summer. So there's a timeline issue here, which I think that realistically we're not going to have all of that work done, within the time frame that we've got.
It does point, though, to a decision maybe for now as to whether or not we do proceed to next month or whether we take it slightly later.
I just wonder, Chair, if one of the options isn't that we basically submit the letter. Are we under a time constraint as far as submitting the letter is concerned? So if we're not under a time constraint for that, we don't need to put in a sort of firm letter straight away. We could put an indication, firming up at a later stage. That may be a way forward.
I think so. I'm glad you came in, Patrick, and said that, because obviously the last sentence of this says that we're removing something specific and we're sending in something that is less specific. And if we are not careful, we could make a mistake in doing that, I think. So I do think that extra time to pick up, obviously, the important points that have been made. And I do think we should think about what is a reasonable ask from us as to a timetable, given that our residents, as I said before, have waited the best part of a decade now for these capacity improvements. I don't think this letter should be silent on the question of a legitimate time frame for both the concept of CS3 to be developed and then delivered. And I think maybe the delay gives us more time. Martin?
So, Chair, on that basis, what we would do is we would go away as officers, build on the comments today. You would then have a chance to have a look at the revised version as Rail North Committee in advance of the September meeting. So you would have a chance to check it before it then went to the next board on the September.
Well, the members happy with that, because that's a much better way of doing it, isn't it? I think. Can see lots of nods there. So thank you, everybody. It's really important discussion, and we got into the right place there, I think. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Charlie, for introducing that. We move then to item 7, Rail North Partnership operational update. Well, we've already welcomed Richard, Chris, and Nick to the meeting today. This is obviously an opportunity to get underneath what might be behind the current problems, which are still there. I think there's been improvements in performance, certainly on Northern, but obviously it's early days with regard to TPE. But I'm going to hand over, I think, first to Gary to take members through the position.
Thank you, Andy. I'm paying the price for sitting at the back. I'm now sitting in someone else's seat, so if I need to move mid-float, you know why. I won't go over the paper, which you all had the chance to see. Maybe just a bit of an update from the last time that we came and saw you. Huge amount of work from both of the operators to date to start our business planning year, which begins in April, obviously, and runs for 13 railway periods. Still, I think fair to say, and the operators can expand on that, in a difficult climate for railway still. Huge amounts of work undertaken to transfer TPE into the operator last resort, from TPE itself, old TPE, from RMP and my team, from DFT and DOHL. Really quite remarkable from the time from the decision to the enactment. Richard, you'll know better than him, but that might have been a record. I think it was certainly a Herculean task to do that in
in 2 weeks. So a fabulous sort of turn put in from people there to keep the stability and start already with Chris in place in lifting the hood again on where TP is at. For Northern, I think we had our quarterly just the other day, and Nick and the gang pressing on there with the transformation, which is going to be essential for their sort of modernisation, maximisation of their efficiency, which is, these are all the words that I'm using all the time towards operators, because they're what the department used towards us. But I think Nick and I, or I have tried on Nick's behalf always to be careful to retain in amongst the press for where need we spend money, and even sometimes sort of pressure from yourselves to do more in services. Nick needs to be able to keep going with the transformation in terms of the processes and procedures and modernisation of depots and things as basic actually as staff facilities, I think, in order that his staff from top to bottom and end to end feel valued, and huge amount of work going into that still. I think that the difficult general industrial background is still affecting both the talks. It undoubtedly makes everybody involved in rails daily longer and more difficult, I think, and I suspect that in order to see some improvements and allowing the operators to reach their full potential, there needs to be a change, and there needs to be a break in that. At some point there needs to be a change in order to make life easier all round, although I don't have the solution at my fingertips. I think we can see the need there for some movement. In terms of what the folks have been doing to support TransPennine route upgrade, great innings from both on that. In particular, I think at TP, in fairness, who are closer and more affected across the scale of their operations by that. But also for Northern, really noteworthy, a good start on the processes that we have to go through to try and renew their rolling stock. Northern has an absolutely huge fleet reaching the end of its useful life. The flat-fronted 15Xs that you see, the ones where the gangway is the front of the train, are probably certainly among the oldest fleets still operating in the country, and Northern has a massively disproportionate number of them. So that's going to be getting them moved on, and one would expect something more modern, more environmentally friendly is going to be essential for next challenge for decarbonisation. So past our first stepping stone with the department, and that we've been sent away with more work to do, but it's all on plan thus far, which that's good news. Inside RNP, we've been given that it's been difficult to find all new funding for the Rail Academy. We've been working with members and their officers to highlight some location and pre-training opportunities, and we'll keep updating you on that over the year, because I'm hopeful actually that can come to some fruition. That is, if you like, the softer version of what Nick's doing and installing hardware that people need to properly get trained as drivers and so on, which he's pressing on with, and is very good news. Our financial situation isn't currently an issue, in that we can afford to hold our place and get better within our business plan, but definitely in terms of growing, it's going to be a real issue. Just as a small example, the Northumberland Railway line, which is great to start operating, we didn't get any new money to operate it, so we are operating it under the same overall headline that we had before we were operating it, and that's the essential test at the moment, I think, from Treasury and others, is if you wish to do more, you need to consume your own smoke in order to do it. And we've done well with that so far, but it has its limitations, in all honesty, as you will all appreciate. And we've got our, Nick is going to, I think, speak to you on this, demand is back, as you've all said in the north. The base costs of our talks is also enormous, off the back of the investment that we had in rolling stock just before we went into COVID, and then the inflation that we've encountered since. So there's a huge balancing act to do in amongst that. And I think in order to make that case for more investment, more services, with the talks, we need to do that trick of either lowering costs, of improving revenue, or of finding, as you were saying, Councillor Hinchcliffe, that solid proxy for revenue, in the sense of the betterment in the economy that we derive from rail, where we would be putting people into further indices of social deprivation and so on, where we're to cut services. I'm been working with David's team and also with Northern on where we get that from, really, where in terms of ourselves speaking to the department, speaking to Treasury, we get that base that is as good as cash, if you like. I think we realise that there is a limit to how much you can grow revenue in the north, even were we to raise fares disproportionately. There's a level to how much ground you can cover, how quickly through that, because you simply lose demand. And so what we need, I think, is another language slightly to speak to people in that legitimises what it is that we're trying to achieve without maybe the same sorts of returns per head that you would see in the Greater London conurbation and so on. So I think that's going to take quite a part of the sort of first half of this year for us.
Thank you very much, Gary. I think I was going to come to you, Nick, was I, now for more of a detailed presentation on the opportunity for passenger and revenue growth.
Yep, certainly, thanks Andy. Just a couple of comments on current performance and then a few slides which I think David is going to be kind enough to pop up on the screen for me. So, Gary, thanks for the summary, which you've actually stolen a lot of my broader thunder, which is good. And Andy, thanks for that unifying message at the beginning as well. And I think that chimes very much with where we are, and I think everyone around the table is aware of our vision, making a positive impact for the north in all we do and all we serve. And this year, the economic output of the business is one of the guiding light for the senior leadership team. And alongside that, the social value piece is very close to our hearts. We've just completed our first social value report in line with the RSSB social value guidance. So that's a piece of work that we can share for interest and so on. And performance is reasonably solid. I think I was reflected earlier, there's more work to be done. Of course there is. You absolutely acknowledge that. I'm really pleased in period one that we hit our targets for cancellations and time to 3. But the industrial action backdrop is difficult, both in terms of the formal action and the noise that creates. The two things that are holding our performance back, train crew absence we've talked about before, but I will pick up that point around Eurovision. The thing that we have to, and I'll say we around the table, I think we're all part of influencing this, is the terms and conditions of employment and working arrangements for most of our crews. So in the west of the Pennines, 95% of our crews are effectively a volunteer resource at the weekends. And that's, if I make that point around Eurovision, was a significant drag on being able to offer significantly more in that space. So I think that's it in terms of the broad piece of the modernisation and efficiency. Gary, thank you. We've already got built in a number of efficiency measures and so on, which are built into that cost piece. I do want to talk about growth, really, and value and subsidy, because one of the things that we keep on talking about internally is making sure the narrative shifts to one of value and subsidy and not just cost. And there's a few slides here to bring some colour to the revenue position for the business, which we talked this year about being in growth. So, take that first slide. This is the bars on the left are a revenue position going back to just before COVID through to the forecast of this year. This year we're expecting about a 5% growth in the revenue position from before COVID. And one of the things that I am very quick to remind people is we are now in a growth position, and we must promote that, because that's important to all of has been said up to now. There's a few highlights there on the right. I'll just draw out a couple. The journeys position is not so great, and there's some good reasons for that. It's nothing to be concerned about. That's partly due to the different market mix. So a stronger leisure demand, which tends to have a high yield. So you'll see the higher revenues, but maybe not the same in terms of the volume growth. But we're expecting about a 9% volume growth this year compared to last year. Still leaving volumes slightly shy of the pre-COVID numbers. And of course, there are big differences across some of the corridors and routes. So look, there's I think I'll put that as an optimistic sense of where we are. We see an optimistic position ahead. We'll talk about some of the things we've done to help drive that. David, if you ping on to the next slide. One of the key features that we've been pressing very hard is in the marketing space. Typically £5 or £6 return for every pound of investment in that. and a couple of the marketing campaigns were mentioned earlier in the meeting, which we've had great success with. One or two not quite so successful. We're trialling some things there as well, but certainly the flash sales have been enormously successful, both in channel shift, getting people to move to more digital products, and in driving improved customer satisfaction. Our customer satisfaction rates for those advanced purchase deep discount products have been higher than elsewhere, and they've bumped up the overall customer satisfaction scores for the business as a whole. So this isn't just marketing to get more money in, but it's driving other positive outcomes as well. And we are now having record-breaking app transactions. That digital transaction space is in a much better place. We pop to the next slide, the sort of slightly tougher side of looking after the money. Revenue protection remains a very, very core piece of our work with teams on the ground. We've halved ticketless travel over the last 4 years or so, 3-4 years or so. Round about just shy of 70% of our tickets journeys are booked digitally now, and that brings a different challenge in terms of revenue protection. One of the things we are very focused on is validating those tickets, because that then means that they can't be recycled and reused. And you can see the number there in terms of industry revenue that's recovered. About 10% of our journeys connect into the wider network, so the validation of those tickets going into the wider network have a broader benefit. A couple of very specific areas I thought the committee might be interested in. The next slide, please, David, is educational seasons for one. So we've been, the bar chart there at the bottom shows our numbers of tickets sold between 17 and 18 up to last year in terms of the scholar tickets, about 2.5 times increase in volume, 127 active schools in that space, and some good modal shifts. So local community teams, some really good engagement, some tricky times through the adjusted timetables through COVID and so on, but that engagement has remained very strong in terms of designing the products and the timings of services and so on to hit key school flows, and we've been pressing in that space on the selling of those scholar passes, which helps in the revenue protection space as well. And then finally, which might be of interest in terms of the broader network and services, this is just one particular service that I've picked out on the next slide. I mentioned earlier the new Leeds Chester service on a Sunday, which has helped deal with some of that capacity challenge and helps in terms of the TransPennine route upgrade shift of capacity across the Pennines. The bar chart here shows a specific market there between Bradford and Chester, an increase in the volume over that corridor, and also the shift into advanced purchase journeys. So you can see that leisure market coming through and people taking value from a good value product in that. So that's a nice little case study. There's several of them around the network where we're pressing those, we're pressing markets where we've got a busy corridor, maybe to a leisure destination. We might press a different corridor to a similar leisure destination, which might happen to be a different town or city, but offer a similar sort of leisure experience in terms of out in the country or a city experience or something. So we're using those techniques to nudge volume around the network and fill what are a lot of empty seats that we've got. Whilst there are some busy services, there's a lot of empty seats out there to fill. That was it. I thought I'd open it up to questions, but hopefully that gives committee members a little bit of an insight in terms of what we're doing in driving the revenue piece and ultimately the subsidy position for the operation.
No, it does, Nick, and I think it reflects a lot of progress, doesn't it? And the figures in the paper certainly point to that. So, you know, we would want to congratulate you on that, and hope that TPE will soon be on a very similar journey to the one that Northern has been on. Chris, did you want to say anything at this point, or did you want to we pick it up later on in closed session?
I'm more than happy to, Chair. I don't know whether it was perhaps appropriate, depending on how you wanted to run the meeting, for Richard to say a few things, and then maybe I'll just give an initial assessment of TP and plans.
I think it is important, actually. You know, I mean, obviously there's probably a limit to what you can say at this stage, given it's early days. But obviously, the public are still experiencing high levels of cancellations on TransPennine Express, and I think there's been a broad welcome for the move that's been made, and I think
this committee was unanimous in calling for it, and I think we made the right judgment as we did with Northern, and I think we've done it again. I think it is important to, in public session, for people to have a sense, Richard, from you, and then from you, Chris, just as to where you feel you're up to, and if there's more that you need to say outside of the public session, that's for your judgment too.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Very quickly then, I'll just do a short intro. I think the first thing to explain for those who don't know who I am, I'm Richard George, I'm the chairman of DOHL. I have a chief executive called Robin Gisby, and Robin will be known to some of you, not all of you. Robin is the new chair of TransPennine Trains. He's also the chair of Northern. He's also the chair of LNER. He's also the chair of South Eastern Trains, because those are the companies we have in the group. It's a much larger group now than it was ever planned to be. The last time I was at this committee was in March 2020. Some might. The last time I was at this committee was in March 2020 when I introduced Nick, when we'd just been granted the privilege of looking after Northern. 3 days later we went into lockdown, so hopefully that won't happen when we're introducing Chris Jackson this time around. It was a very quick transition, and as Gary said, a lot of people worked very hard on the transition to bring TPE in. It was quick. It went extremely well, thanks to a lot of hard work in Gary's team, DFT, but TPE particularly, and also thanks to First. First played well in this transition. They can make it lumpy if they want to, and they didn't. They played it very well. And I'd like to pay tribute to Matthew Galton, previous MD of TPE, and the directors and management staff of TPE, who've worked very, very hard on their recovery plan to try and improve the position. Because one thing we all around this table want is a better train service, a more reliable train service, and a train service that is worthy of the name of TransPennine Express, which is what we want it to be. We've moved Chris over from Northern to be the interim managing director. We're saying interim not because we don't trust him, we do, but as I mentioned earlier, we are keeping TPE and Northern separate. We felt it appropriate to put an advertisement out, which will be going out next week, saying, an advert for the managing director of TPE, because we want to emphasise the fact this is a separate company. It is a different company, and this was a very quick transition. It was we needed to put in a new managing director, not because of anything wrong with Matthew Galton, but the only weapon we've got in our armour is to reset relationships. And resetting relationships with yourselves, resetting the relationship with the trade unions, resetting the relationship with our staff, resetting the relationship with our customers is what we need to do. We can't immediately change the timetable, we can't immediately change the terms of reference or the negotiations with the trade unions, but what we can do is just reset those relationships, and part of that has to be some new people around the table and some new faces around the table. So we've moved Chris in. Chris is a very experienced operator, because the key issue for us now is to understand what's happening inside the recovery plan and understand, more importantly, its trajectory going forward. It had some success in the last few weeks. We need to understand what the trajectory going forward looks like. It was dealing with the right issues about more drivers. We need more drivers, but actually there are a whole host of issues that make this complicated. The comment earlier about it's a shame that things don't happen on railways more quickly. Yes, it is a shame. I discovered a clip of myself, a video clip from 1988 recently, where I was standing in front of a group of 250 commuters, and I started with, quote, "There's no reason why you should continue to be patient with us." And I think I must have said that a dozen times in my career in front of large audiences, and I think we're in that place here. We really don't want you to continue being patient with us, because we need to fix this. And there's a lot of detail that we need to get into to actually untangle where we are and move forward. And that's not a criticism of anybody about where we were before. It's just the reality of the position that we're in. And they're all easy words. The hard job is going to be for Chris. There you go, Chris. Off you go.
Thanks, Richard, and thank you, Chair, for the well wishes as well. It really actually is an honour to be asked to lead the business on an interim basis, and the people that I've encountered at TransPennine so far, right from the front line up to the senior leaders, have made me feel very, very welcome. And what gives me a lot of comfort is they're all absolutely committed on doing the best thing for customers, and that's a great place to be. As you might expect, the team feel a little bit battered and bruised, but that's my role, just to dust them off, pick them up, and ultimately deliver a plan that's going to stabilise the business. I've been very clear that I've got three key priorities. First priority being, of course, to reduce cancellations and make the trains run on time. And the second one is to reset relationships, and the third one is to support the delivery of this massive engineering programme, which is the TransPennine route upgrade. And you can hold me account to those priorities when I see you again at these committees. So I've commissioned an operational deep dive. That's one of the first things that I've done that will report back later this month. And that will cover every aspect of the operation, identify quite clearly what's hurting us, and more importantly, what we need to do to fix things. I'll use that output to develop a clear plan, what I'm going to call the stabilisation plan, and I'll communicate that to all of the senior leaders around the table here, but also more importantly to our frontline colleagues as well, who we need to bring along the journey with us. I think it's important just at this forum just to get to the core of the issues that are facing TransPennine Express. So I think, in short, the business has become far too complicated. It's a relatively small business, but it has 4 different types of train that has generated a massive training burden. There are 5,000 outstanding training days. We need to significantly reduce that to improve reliability. And at the nub of the issue, the core challenge is just 50% of drivers are competent to drive all the types of train and to drive over all the routes within their roster. It's a big gap, and therefore it's really important that we work closely with partners such as ASLEF to move some of that forward. I mean, I'm hoping that the transfer to DOHL will help to reset some of those relationships, as Richard alluded to, including the one in particular with ASLEF. I'll just give you a commitment here, as I did in Northern as well at the various committees. I'll be fully transparent with you throughout on this journey, and I'll be ready to be scrutinised on the decision making here and elsewhere. And I've also committed the same to the frontline colleagues in my team at TransPennine Express as well. All I just ask is just give me a little bit of space, and the exec team and the wider team, just to build that stabilisation plan, which we'll communicate to you in July. I really look forward to working with you and also for your support in resetting some of the relationships that are critical to our success. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, all of you actually, but particularly Chris, for what you just said. We do genuinely wish you well, and I would want you to convey from this committee to all of your staff actually that at no point did we mean in any way to suggest that they were part of the problem, because I think it was a difficult time for staff. I think we all felt that when we were out and about. They were often picking up the pressure on the front line for the complexity above them, if we can put it that way, without going further. And it was a hard thing, wasn't it, to be in that position, as it was for Northern staff, and we remember their experience as well. You could say that passengers and staff were let down by the situation that we found ourselves in, but they do need our support, and I'm glad to see that you're prioritising lifting their morale in this particular moment in time. Two quick things for me, and I'm conscious of time, but they're important things. Patrick, you've spoken a lot about the importance of the Rail Academy and railway careers across the north and how we get much better. I've put out some thinking recently on technical education in Greater Manchester, which might complement your work in this area. Can this now be integrated as one rail academy to serve both operators? Is this an area for integration and potentially efficiency that we can work on to pick up those training issues? Second point is just if you could touch on rest day working, which we know is critical to restoring the TPE timetable. Obviously, I'm not sure how much detail you feel you can go into at this stage, but an indication to us. I think we all understood that there were many other disputes that had been built up with TPE that meant that the goodwill to do rest day working wasn't there. And so I know there's a lot to be worked through before you can get back to a place where you can activate a rest day working arrangement. But if you could just give us an explanation of where that situation is up to as much as you can at this point.
I'll give a general position and I'll ask Chris for the detailed position. Rest day working, from my perspective, is what I would call an accelerator. It would not be appropriate to, in the long term, plan to run this railway relying on rest day working. We need more drivers such that we can have a system that allows us to operate without rest day working. In the meantime, with that scale of backlog, we need to cut into that backlog as quickly as possible, and rest day working is the accelerator that would allow us to do that. So that's the context of it. It's not because we want rest day working structurally forever, but we do need it in the short term.
Thanks, Richard. I think you've covered that quite well. I think I've illustrated in my previous comments just how significant the training backlog is, and in the short term, a rest day working agreement would certainly help to address that backlog, but it is not something that we would ever intend to rely on in the long term. And rest assured, that's right at the top of my to-do list, is to try and work collaboratively with ASLEF in that space to move that one forward.
Chair, if I pick the academy point very briefly.
Yes, please do,
I've
thanks.
already spoken with one of Chris's new team on exactly that point to start opening that conversation where the opportunity in there might arise. And I think that plays in some of that efficiency and working for the North Together point. We already train for a number of other operators in Northern, so that you know, the architecture is probably there to build from.
Could we move this forward with a bit of urgency? Because I think we could all work with you to find a partner college in the Liverpool City region, Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire, Sheffield City region that would have the simulator. And, you know, I just think the more you open up to us, the more we will connect you with the partners and players that, you know, we're not talking about a new building here, are we? You know, we're talking of a model where we reach, particularly perhaps communities where people aren't thinking of rail as a career. I think the more you work with the four combined authorities still in this room today in this meeting, the more this thing will succeed and the quicker it will succeed, I would suggest. So I wonder if we could get, I know Chair, I'm the Chair, but you're a different Chair, but you're very passionate about this, and rightly so, and I think we do need to.
No, Andy, you're quite right, and I thought your intervention a few weeks ago was very timely, and it shows a changing in attitude to just how important both technical and vocational qualifications are across the board, without any doubt, and it doesn't all have to be at a certain set level. Different people need different levels. And I did raise the point earlier on, Chris, but I'd like to sort of slightly come back to it again. One of the most important things we know from public transport is reliability. Short-term cancellations is what causes the most anguish as far as people are concerned. And I hope there is something you can do about addressing that. Appreciate the very difficulties you've got, and I'm not trying to put any extra pressure, but I just think that should be something to bear in mind.
Can I just add one thing to that, Chair, which is shore forming as well. You're right about cancellations do drive people absolutely mad, but being on a platform and the train turning up, you go, great, but when you can't actually get on the train, that's even more frustrating.
Just in response, I absolutely recognise it. Customers suffering across the north. I don't want to over-promise and under-deliver. Please just rest assured that the work that I'm doing with the team on the operational deep dive will get to the nub of the issues, and I'll communicate my plan with you in due course, and that will include discussions on short formations and, of course, cancellations as well.
Susan?
Yeah, obviously, I think we all understand you've got to now go through a period where you look at the recovery plan, make sure it's fit for purpose, etc. going forward. Quite understand that. I think when you do come back with a recovery plan, just to manage my expectations, is that I understand when Northern Rail had a similar issue a few years ago, you had to cut services to get back on track. If that is something you recommend this time, I want an absolute guarantee that all those services are put back after you've got back on track. I don't want to be in a position where we're still trying to get back the services we needed before. So I just you know, we need to get back to 100% is what I'm saying in any recovery plan. So just a bit of reassurance on that. And my second point before I leave it, Chair, is just around the Rail Academy. I think we're all quite keen to make sure that actually works. And yes, it's not a building, and it's conversations with all the combined authorities. I think those conversations have happened actually. I think there's quite a lot of work going behind the scenes. I suspect the problem might be money. So I just wonder if there, you know, it's so important, is skills for the future in rail. We've all had conversations today where it's hard to get people. It should be an absolute industry priority to invest in skills for the future. It's not an altruistic thing to do, it's an essential thing to run a service. Thank you.
It's absolutely relevant to that point, which is just, I mean, South Yorkshire just had to, we're in the process of closing down in CATI, which is the National College for Advanced Infrastructure, the rail college, essentially. And that is because absolutely the lack of investment in those skills that is being made, and in no small part actually related to things like GBR, etc. So if there is a role for South Yorkshire to play in sort of stepping forward with infrastructure which is already there that supports skills in that sector, then please do let us know. Really happy to have that conversation with you. Can I just make another couple of quick points before you do come back, which just, I know we've said this in private and I've said this to you personally, but I wish you all the best. I genuinely do. I you know, everything Andy and others have said was the right decision. That doesn't make it any easier for you, and it is no small challenge that you've taken on. So wish you all the success in the world. I would just say I recognise the challenge, and certainly when you get a bunch of rail people together, invariably we end up talking about rail projects that are 20, 30 years into the future, and I would just ask you to please remember that this is about passenger experience, people getting to work, to see friends and family, to go on holiday, to get about our country and the north, and I just think that please do put that at the forefront of your thinking and planning when doing the work that you're evidently now doing. There is no shortage of things that you will be asked to do and have to do, but I think the more that you can communicate with the travelling public and keep the travelling public at the forefront of your minds, the more goodwill you will get, not just from the travelling public, but from people around this table as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your feedback, Councillor Hinchcliffe and Mayor Coppard. So going on to Mayor Coppard, your point first, yeah, absolutely, it's the customers front and centre of our mind, and as I hopefully touched on before, but just to reaffirm, the commitment to the customer is unrelenting, really, in the business, and I've been really pleased to see that. But I absolutely accept that they need to see tangible improvements quickly. The Rail Academy point, I think we all can collectively take that one away and see if there's anything that we can do as I get closer to the brief in that particular area, just 10 days in at the moment. And the other one as well, of course, in terms of services, I don't want to preempt the outcome of the operational deep dive. So at this stage, there's no thinking around service design, but that may be an outcome that we have to come back and speak to you about.
Chris, could I really welcome what you said today, and you know the way you're going about things. Is it in order for me to invite you back to our September meeting to present that plan? Does that give you enough time to do that? Because in the spirit of what Oliver said, you know, we want this improvement to come as quickly as possible. Would you be in a position to do that?
Chair, that's fine. Yeah, as I've committed, I intend, if I can get diary space in your very busy diaries, to take you through some of that in late July. But I don't have any issues, in the interest of being fully transparent, with bringing a plan back to share with you in September.
Okay, well that's helpful, I think, because obviously we can help shape that plan as well, and then what comes back here is something we've all had an input in. I think that's a good way to proceed.
Chair, just I think I can say I did speak to Robin Gisby, and he's hoping to come to the next transport for the North Board meeting in September as well, which will be after the deep dive. So that will be an interesting opportunity for the whole of the TFN to hear the updates as to where we're going.
Good. Okay. It does feel like a new start, doesn't it? As I said at the start of the meeting, I think we can proceed from here. I think without some of the the difficulties and the tensions that we've had. So let's proceed on that basis. And you've got goodwill. You can hear that around the table today. But we are impatient for change. You know that as well. Colleagues, that's our kind of public agenda. I think I have to sort of move to go into private session under item 9. And I'm sorry, confirming Wednesday the 13th of September for the next session. I don't know why I've not got an item 8. I don't know.